Hi everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at integrating RadTreeView with RadBreadCrumb. As a reminder, both RadTreeView and RadBreadCrumb are part of the Telerik Rad controls for Silverlight and Rad controls for WPF control suites for .NET XAML development. As explained in the overview page, first we're going to be implementing ourselves a RadBreadCrumb. Then we're going to go ahead and create some data. This is going to look pretty familiar if you've watched some of the other videos, so we're going to breeze right past that to get to the point where we're adding a RadTreeView. After that, we can see that we have data displaying in both RadBreadCrumb and RadTreeView, so the last step will of course need to be syncing up the controls so that what you do in one control is reflected in the other. I've already gone ahead and created a brand new solution using the Telerik Visual Studio extensions, so we can see that we have the Telerik Windows controls and navigation assemblies, and I've also gone ahead and added our familiar BreadCrumb data class, which has an ID, header text, and that familiar crumbs list of child BreadCrumb data class objects. Since that's all set, we can go ahead and do a little bit of work in our XAML file to add both the RadBreadCrumb and RadTreeView, but we're only going to work with the RadBreadCrumb for right now. So we can say grid.row definitions, add a row definition with height auto. This is going to be for our RadBreadCrumb, and add one more for our RadTreeView. So we can go ahead below our grid row definitions and say Telerik RadBreadCrumb with x name equals x RadBreadCrumb, and we also want to add our Telerik RadTreeView. X name familiar x RadTreeView, and we want to give that grid row 1. So now we have two controls set up, and we need to add a little bit of data in the back end to actually just display something in our controls. So we'll step into the code behind, and on the loaded event, we first need to make our root item, if you remember. So we can say breadcrumb data class root equals brand new breadcrumb data class. Our root ID will be 0, and our root.header text will be root, just to keep things simple. Now of course, with RadBreadCrumb, we need to add this to the header of the control. So RadBreadCrumb.header is going to be root, and RadBreadCrumb.header member path is going to be that header text value. So now we're pretty set, as you know. We have our root element, but that means we need to add some child elements. Conveniently, we have a little bit of code, jump through 2 quick for loops to add 10 child items, each of which has 3 subsequent child items. So we have a nice little hierarchy going. And now we have all this data, we can add it to RadBreadCrumb. So add RadBreadCrumb.hierarchical item source is going to be crumbs. As you remember, we're using the name of the child collection, not necessarily pointing at an object. The control will handle that by itself. Then add RadBreadCrumb member path is once again going to be header text. Then of course, because we want text mode, we'll say RadBreadCrumb.textMode path. Once again, our familiar header text. And last but certainly not least, RadBreadCrumb.item source is going to be that root crumbs collection. So we'll go ahead and save this, run it, and now you can see we have our RadBreadCrumb. The root goes into children, children have grandchildren, we have that whole history thing enabled, and we can go ahead and do all of our text search. So go child 2, grandkid 1, 2, and it's all set like that. But now of course we need to add some items to RadTreeView, because we want RadTreeView to have the ability to display the same collection of items so that we can synchronize them. So we'll go back into Visual Studio, and we step back into our XAML page, and now under RadTreeView, give it a second to catch up. Under RadTreeView, we want to go ahead and add a few properties. So first up, selection mode is going to be single. Since RadBreadCrumb can only have a single value, we want to have selection mode on RadTreeView limit us to a single value. But we also want to mess with the item template of RadTreeView. There's a reason for this, because we have a hierarchical collection and we want it to display as such. So we can say Telerik RadTreeView the item template. Here we want to do a Telerik hierarchical data template. Item source is going to be binding crumbs, because we're coming from the crumbs child collection. And in here we want to have a text block with text bound to that same familiar header text. Now what this is going to do is take our collection that we're going to bind to RadTreeView in a second and say this is in fact hierarchical. If you're looking for children, they will come from a crumbs collection, and for our data template for how we want to display data, we just want to show a text block with the header text value. So do a quick save over here, jump back into our code behind, and now the same place that we're setting the x RadBreadCrumb item source, we can go ahead and say x RadTreeView item source equals root.crumbs. So keep it nice and simple, and now we go ahead and run this, and we're going to see both RadBreadCrumb and RadTreeView showing off the same values because they're bound to the same exact collection. Cool, now everything's displaying. We can see RadBreadCrumb once again. We have our child items, we go over our grandchild items. We can do the exact same thing, go into child 2, see grandkid 1. The problem is these are not synchronized, so I can go to RadTreeView, start clicking around, and it's not reflecting the RadBreadCrumb. And same thing, if I go modifying things in RadBreadCrumb, we're not going to see those changes in RadTreeView. So we need to take a few more steps to synchronize everything up and hook into a few events to make this happen. Stepping back into Visual Studio, we're going to go back to our code in the XAML view, and we want to set an event on RadTreeView, which is going to be selection change. Wait for everything to catch up with us. Auto-generate that event. And in RadBreadCrumb, we want to step back and say current item changed. Again, let the event generate for that one. And the last thing we want to do, and this is a little tricky one because you may not realize you have to do this, is set the text search text path on RadTreeView. This is what is going to allow the path data from RadBreadCrumb to work with RadTreeView and integrate together, because they're essentially using the same method for looking at a path of a hierarchy, but this will actually let us say using this value is how you determine your path structure. So we'll go in Telerik, text search, .text path, and this is the old familiar header text. Now this means we can jump into the code behind and start working with these two events we just generated to actually synchronize everything. This is actually going to be a lot easier than you expect it to be. First we'll start from the RadBreadCrumb. In this case we want to do two things. We want to make sure that whatever item we're selecting is visible in RadTreeView. So we'll make that pretty easy. xRadTreeView.bring path into view. This will be xRadBreadCrumb.path. Now this is the reason that we want to do that text search, so that this path can go ahead and reflect in the RadTreeView path and have everything sync up nicely. But of course we also want to have the item selected, so we can say xRadTreeView.selectedItem. It's going to equal the RadBreadCrumb.currentItem. This is the reason that we wanted that single selection value in RadTreeView, because we can only ever have one current item in RadBreadCrumb, so we want the exact same thing with RadTreeView. Which brings us to the RadTreeView selection changed event, the other part of keeping everything in sync. So for this, we're going to start with an if statement, and first we want to make sure that addedItems.count is greater than 0, because we need to have added items in order to make this happen. And we're also going to do a quick check on xRadTreeView, and we want to say container from item recursive. And what this is going to do is let us make sure that we have everything set up within RadTreeView to pull the item. Otherwise we're going to be looking to pull a path from the selected item and send it to the RadBreadCrumb, but if we don't have everything set up correctly, we're not going to be able to send that path and everything will just come crashing down. So we can say addedItems, since we know the count is going to be over 0.0, and we want to make sure this is not null. That's the exact check we need to make sure that this is actually working. So in this case, we can then say xRadBreadCrumb.path. This is going to come from that same thing that we just saw. So I can go ahead and copy and paste xRadTreeView.container from item recursive. And then once we have that set, we can say full path. And this is going to send the path, so basically the hierarchical navigation that you need to get to the current item, to the RadBreadCrumb. Go ahead and run this one last time, and we'll be able to see everything synced up and working nicely together. So now we can see we have our RadBreadCrumb, we have our RadTreeView, so we can go ahead and say we want to select child 4, and we see RadTreeView is reflecting that. We go into child 4, select grandkid 1, and we see that going reflected back into RadBreadCrumb. So as you can see, it's actually pretty easy to set this up, and with very little effort, we have a really quick ability to go ahead and navigate quickly through a hierarchical structure and grandchildren, and then have it reflected in our actual window. Kind of like the whole Windows Explorer concept, except now you can easily add it to your own Silverlight and WPF applications. So we've seen how easily you can integrate RadTreeView with RadBreadCrumb and really tie these two navigation controls together for a unique user experience. Stay tuned for more videos in the XAMLflix series to find out how you can further enhance your applications and solutions with the Telerik RAD controls for Silverlight and RAD controls for WPF.